Hello everyone, and welcome to my latest video review overview summary thing of the Samyang or Rokinon 24mm T1.5, which is basically a tweaked version of the f1.4 24mm that came before it. Internally they're still the same, except Samyang has repurposed this lens to make it more suitable for video work by including gears for a follow focus and a D-clicked aperture, which means that the clicking from the manual irises you may have used in the past is gone. The difference between T and f stops is a bit long-winded to explain, and it's probably worth a Google search more than explaining it for a YouTube video, but it is basically to do with the actual light loss as the light passes through the lens, and then this is equated into a constant kind of equation, whereas it kind of varies a little bit with f stops over what exactly the output actually is. So the lens itself is still the same internally as the f1.4, even though at first glance it would appear to be like 0.1 of a stop slower. It is still the same lens. The lens physically feels really nice. It's a plastic body which rules out any kind of weather sealing, but it feels more like metal. It also comes with a lens hood which feels like a big improvement over the one that came with the 85mm 1.4, which just felt cheap. This is, you know, quite nice, even if you do have to kind of force it around a bit to make sure that it definitely clicks in place. If I had to bash this lens for anything, it is for some ridiculous reason it focuses way past infinity. Way past. I'm still in the process of figuring out exactly which follow focus I want to take the plunge into getting, but if you're going to use this lens I would strongly recommend getting a follow focus with hard stops so that you can't go past where you mean to go, as it is incredibly easy to do, especially using a depth of field adapter, as I had to mount my lens upside down, so the markings which would have usually have faced to my left hand side were facing to the right hand side. Also, due to a cock up at the hire company I was given the Nikon mount, so I had to use an adapter to stick it on the DSLR, which the lens didn't really like as it didn't quite sit properly and it tended to rattle as I've pulled focus and adjusted the iris. So if you're planning on buying another mount and using an adapter, my advice would be don't. This may have exacerbated the infinity focus issue, as I have a couple of Nikons that do similar things, though nothing to the degree that this does, as it feels as though it's almost another quarter turn past infinity to where the focus reel actually stops. This, amplified with the very shallow focus that can be achieved with the lens, can make it a bit harder than you would expect to accurately keep focus at this field of view. In hindsight, I wish I had used Magic Lantern to either force a higher res to HDMI monitor or to have set up a LUT on the LCD so that I could adjust the sharpness in a different profile and turn that up and then record another one to the camera, which I believe is a new feature that they've actually added in. But I wanted to keep it light, and that hadn't occurred to me at the time as I went out of film, so that might be an easier way of going about doing things. One thing that really did surprise me with this lens was that there was no obvious vignetting occurring, even at T1.5 on a depth of field adapter, which was more akin to 35mm sensor size. I couldn't make out anything. Now, I've never seen that on a lens this wide before. I own a T2.8 and a f4 24mm, and both of them show vignetting at their widest apertures. This was T1.5 and I couldn't see anything. The Canon L24-105 has an obscene amount of vignetting going on that anyone, not even video professionals or amateurs, anyone could spot that straight away. It's incredibly obvious. But I'll be showing a few photo comparisons at f4 a bit later on in the review, so you'll be able to kind of see for yourself really. I have tweaked the DSLR footage in post, having originally shot this in the cine style profile, which kind of requires grading and sharpening in post, and it wasn't until I applied the sharpening that the image really jumped out at me just how sharp this lens is. Even wide open it's quite surprising really. Usually my 24-105 f4L lens is my go-to lens, but this lens just seems incredibly sharp at any stop, though obviously it does sharpen up as it is stopped down. There is, however, quite a bit of purple and green chroma that can be seen, particularly around the high contrast edges of highlights and lights of the cars and the street lights themselves, as well as in some of the focus pulls I did during my time shooting this with the leaves and the branches. You can kind of see that. It also should be noted that most of this chroma that popped up did go away with stopping the lens down to about T2, T2.4. It did fall away very, very quickly. So for this section of the review, I set 3 lenses to the same aperture, or as close as I could get it, measuring the distance, to kind of compare how they look at that focal length and aperture size, basically. So right now this is the Samyang T.5, and the Nikon is an old 24mm 2.8 lens. It has quite a warm hue to it, and the Canon 24-105 L lens, my usual go-to lens, has a huge amount of vignetting. Now this lens is wide open, but that's a huge amount of vignetting. It also seems more contrast in it than the Samyang, which has quite a nice flatter image, which video-wise is probably a bit nicer, as you can obviously dial that in a bit easier than you can taking that out. Of course, it's actually quite a nice lens for stills photography as well. Here you can see me taking the obligatory YouTube video of cats, probably right up in their face, but you can kind of get a sense of how narrow the focus distance is. Okay, so what's occurring here is basically put the camera into AV mode, so it determines how long it wants to shoot the shutter for, and just stopping it down by a stop each time, just to show how the lens does get sharper as the more it's closed down. But obviously as it begins to drift past T.8, obviously the image begins to become a bit softer with the diffraction going on the lens. So when it reaches T22, I'll jump back to T1.5, and you'll be able to see that's much sharper. But then if I jump that down to T4, you can see straight away that's a huge difference. Then I went and compared the 3 lenses from earlier, again in stills mode, the Canon, the Nikon and the Samyang, all at f4, T4 again, and just basically compared and contrast what was going on between them. Now there are huge colour differences. This is the Canon colour corrected to match the Samyang, and the lenses themselves at 100%. And the images themselves at 100% view. This is the Samyang, the Nikon, bit of lens flare appearing there, and the Canon. Now I did shoot this with the polarizer on the Samyang, so that may have affected a bit of glare coming in through the lens and given it a slight tint, but even so it's still got less saturation in the image than say the Canon. Also you can see in the upper right hand side of the Canon photo here a large amount of chroma going on, whereas the Samyang doesn't have that. Okay, well there ends this video review for the Samyang 24mm. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and if you have, you know, comment, rate, subscribe, all that usual stuff really. I never quite know how to sign off these things, so I'm just going to say a big bye-bye and hope to see you again in the future or something. Alright, cheers!